Part 1. The Girl at the End of the World. There is a moment, somewhere in the ruins of what used to be civilization, where a little girl sits alone in the rubble of a world that has ended, eating a candy bar she found in the wreckage. She is not crying. She has already done that. At some point, the crying runs out, and what is left behind is something quieter, a kind of hollow stillness, the way a room feels after everyone has gone home and you are the only one left standing in it. The streets outside her window, if you can still call them streets, are full of ash and silence. The buildings that used to scrape the sky are bent and broken now, leaning against each other like tired old men who no longer have the energy to stand straight. The sky itself has changed color, not quite the shade it used to be, as if someone reached up and smeared it with a dirty cloth and then walked away. The girl finishes her candy bar. She licks the wrapper. And then she sits there, small and dark-haired in the middle of the end of the world, waiting for something though she does not know exactly what. That girl is Marceline. She is maybe 6 or 7 years old when the Mushroom War ends the world she was born into. And the thing that strikes you, if you sit with her story long enough, is not the tragedy of it, though there is plenty of tragedy, but rather the strange, stubborn, almost unreasonable way she keeps going anyway. The way she just picks herself up from the rubble every single time. 1,000 years will pass. The world will remake itself around her. Empires of candy and science and ice will rise and crumble. She will lose people she loves in ways that are almost too painful to look at directly, and still she keeps going. That is what we are here to explore tonight. Not just who Marceline is, but what she means. What her 1,000-year existence says about grief and loss and identity and love, and what it feels like to be alive genuinely, uncomfortably, beautifully alive, in a world that keeps changing around you while you stay the same. So settle in. Get comfortable. Let whatever is outside go quiet for a while. This is a long story, and it deserves to be told slowly. Marceline Abadir is, at first glance, a contradiction built out of contradictions. She is half demon, born to Hunson Abadir, the Lord of Evil, the ruler of the Nightosphere, a being of such profound chaotic power that the mere act of summoning him to the surface world sends him on a soul-consuming rampage before the episode is even half over. Her father is, by any reasonable metric, the embodiment of everything that is wrong with the universe. He devours souls. He wears an amulet that transforms its wearer into an engine of pure, destructive evil. He rules an entire dimension dedicated to suffering and torment. And her mother, Elise, was fully human. Warm, dark-skinned, gentle, the kind of person who would sing lullabies in a trailer in the middle of a post-apocalyptic wasteland because her daughter was scared of her dreams. The kind of mother who would die quietly and alone rather than let her daughter see her suffering, who would tell a lie about going ahead to a clubhouse, a safe place, so that the girl would keep walking forward instead of staying behind to watch. Half-demon father, fully human mother, born at the intersection of the supernatural and the mundane, the monstrous and the mortal. And then the Mushroom War takes everything away, all at once. And the little girl who was already navigating the impossible question of what she even is finds herself navigating it alone, in the cold and the dark and the ash, in a world that has lost the language to answer her. The Mushroom War is never shown to us in full in Adventure Time. The show deals in fragments, in glimpses and echoes, rather than the full, terrible panorama. What we know is that it was a nuclear cataclysm of some kind, a war that ended human civilization and remade the planet into the land of Oo across approximately 1,000 years. The bombs fell, or the weapons activated, or whatever the final terrible thing was happened. And the world that Marceline was born into simply ceased to exist. She survives it as a child. We see her in the ruins afterward, that small figure in the apocalyptic stillness. We see her with her mother in the immediate aftermath, the two of them trying to navigate their way to a fallout shelter Elise had heard about, a place she calls the clubhouse, promising Marceline it will be safe. And we see Elise getting sick radiation poisoning, most likely, though the show never uses that clinical language and hiding it from her daughter. And then we see, in one of the quieter, devastating moments in the entire series, Elise sending Marceline ahead, telling her to draw a map, to find the way forward, to keep going, and Marceline going, because her mother told her to, not yet understanding that her mother is not following behind. The cruelty of it is not in the death itself. The cruelty is in the shape of the loss. Marceline doesn't get to see it. She doesn't get to say goodbye. She leaves, and her mother stays. and the gap between them that should have been temporary becomes permanent without warning. And Marceline would carry that wound for a very long time. That particular kind of grief that doesn't come from witnessing loss, but from turning around one day and realizing that someone who should be there simply isn't, and the last image you have of them is of them standing in the distance watching you walk away and smiling so you wouldn't worry. What does that do to a person, to a child? There is a particular kind of trauma that comes from what feels like abandonment, even when the reality is more complicated than that. The body and mind of a child don't particularly care about the nuance of cause. What registers is simpler and more brutal. I needed you, and you weren't there. That message gets written somewhere deep, somewhere that doesn't easily update itself even when the conscious mind eventually learns better. And Marceline would carry that particular inscription in her bones for centuries. You can hear it in her music, the way she circles around themes of people leaving, of needing something from someone who isn't capable of giving it, of love that exists, but can't quite reach through the distance between people. The profound irony of Elise's choice is that it was a love-shaped act. She lied to Marceline to protect her. She sent her forward so that Marceline would survive, would keep moving, would not have to witness her mother dying in the ruins. She sacrificed her own final goodbye for her daughter's psychological well-being, or what she believed would be her psychological well-being. She thought, Marceline walking away with hope is better than Marceline staying with the truth. She thought, I can give her this at least. But the body and the unconscious don't read intent. They read what happened. And what happened was, my mother was there and then she wasn't, and I didn't see it coming, and I didn't get to say anything. The Distant Lands special obsidian eventually shows us that Marceline discovered, at some point, that her mother had left her a recording, audio evidence of love and explanation, and the deliberate nature of the sacrifice. And even that revelation, even the proof that Elise had chosen this, that it came from love, doesn't simply erase the wound. It recontextualizes it. That is not the same thing as healing. Understanding why a door was closed on you doesn't make the room feel less empty, but it does change what you do with the closed door. It changes whether you carry it as a wound or eventually, slowly, as a history. The thing about Marceline's beginning is that it sets the template for almost everything that comes after. She is formed in loss. The world she knows ends before she is old enough to really understand it. And she has to build herself, has to figure out who and what she is in the ruins of something she never got to properly inhabit. That is a very particular kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being isolated, exactly, though she will experience that too. This is the loneliness of having no foundation, of being adrift not just in space but in meaning, because the structures that were supposed to give her a sense of self and belonging and continuity have all been destroyed before she had a chance to use them properly. She did not get a childhood in the ordinary sense. She got a few years of warmth, and then a world-ending event, and then the slow absence of the person who was singing her through it. And yet she keeps going. The candy bar in the rubble, the waiting in the stillness. A child at the end of the world, having absolutely no idea what comes next, but sitting with it anyway instead of simply shutting down. That quality, the stubbornness of her survival, the way she refuses to stop even when stopping would be easier, is the first and most fundamental thing about Marceline. Everything else about her character, every philosophical layer the show builds on top of her, grows from that original root. She is, at her deepest level, someone who learned how to keep going when all the reasons for going were taken away. Most people, if they are honest with themselves, have a much lower threshold than they imagine they do. The things that make survival feel worth it, comfort, connection, the sense that someone is paying attention to whether you make it, these are close to requirements. Marceline found something else to run on, some fuel that is not external, some core of self that did not depend on the world cooperating with her need to survive. She built it herself, out of the ash and the silence. She found it. At 6 or 7 years old, alone in the ash, she found it. That is not a small thing. That is, arguably, the most impressive thing about her. Not the 1,000 years, not the vampire powers, not the music, important as all of those are. The thing she managed to locate in herself in the ruins of everything, the stubborn aliveness that refused to be cancelled by circumstances that cancelled the rest of the world, that is where the whole story of Marceline begins. And everything else grows from there. Before we move further, I want to stop and acknowledge you for a moment. If you're watching this late at night, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are and what time it is there. I genuinely love knowing that this video is reaching into someone's 2 a.m., their rainy afternoon, their long commute, their quiet hour before everything else wakes up. This is made for those moments. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, it means a lot, and it means you'll be here for the next one. Now, back to Marceline. Part 2. Simon and the Slow Goodbye. In the immediate aftermath of the Mushroom War, a man named Simon Petrikov finds a little girl crying in the ruins of a city. He is not in great shape himself. Simon was an antiquarian, a collector and scholar of rare and ancient items before the war. A gentle and bookish man with wire-rimmed glasses and a warm disposition, and a fiancée named Betty, whom he loved with the particular devotion of someone who had finally found the person the world had been quietly pointing him toward. He was, by all indications, a kind man, the sort of person who gets excited about the histories of old objects, who sees significance in things that have lasted, who is moved by the idea that something has survived through time and arrived in the present carrying its whole long past. At some point in his research, he acquired a magical crown, an artifact connected to ancient winter mythology and extraordinary power. The crown gave him power over ice and snow, the kind of power that could stop monsters and hold back the cold that swept through a world after nuclear winter. But it consumed his mind slowly, chipping away at his sanity and his memories like frost-eroding stone. Simon could feel it happening. He could feel the parts of his mind that he knew best, his humor, his warmth, his love for Betty, his intellectual curiosity growing fainter each time he put the crown on. And he put it on repeatedly, because without it he would freeze to death in the ruins, and he could not die, because he had found a small girl who needed him to stay alive. Betty had left him before the war ended, unable to watch the person she loved disappear piece by piece, unable to participate in the ongoing tragedy of his transformation while being powerless to stop it. Simon was alone, wandering, surviving through the crown's power while the crown systematically dismantled everything that made survival meaningful to him. He finds Marceline. He crouches down in the ruins and comforts her. He gives her a stuffed toy, a bear called Hambo, which will become possibly the most emotionally significant object in the entire show, and he becomes, over the weeks and months and years that follow, the closest thing to a parent she has had since Elise walked away from her into the ash. What they build together in the ruins of the world is remarkable in its ordinariness. Simon makes jokes, terrible jokes, the evidence suggests. Dad jokes delivered by someone who is technically not her dad but has fully adopted the aesthetic of fatherhood. He calls her Marcy. He watches over her. He sings songs, or lets her sing to him, or finds moments of warmth in circumstances that have no business containing any. And he keeps wearing the crown. Every time there is danger, every time the monsters that roam the post-war world come close enough to threaten them, he puts it on and uses it, and gets a little further from himself. The episode Simon and Marcy shows us the progression of this with devastating precision. We see him at a point where he is still mostly himself, glasses intact, humor operational, singing the theme from an old television show to cheer Marceline up in a way that is both ridiculous and tender. And then we see him at the end of the episode, after using the crown against a tide of ooze zombies, calling her Gunter, the name the Ice King uses for his penguins. The name that has replaced hers in the section of his mind being overwritten. He knows this is happening. He is documenting it on VHS tapes he records for Marceline tapes the Ice King will eventually bring to her without understanding what they are, centuries later, not knowing they are his own confession. In those recordings, Simon slips between his own voice and the Ice King's fractured speech patterns, sometimes mid-sentence. He apologizes. He explains. He keeps trying to put into language what is happening to him, what it means for her, what he wishes he could guarantee for her future. He writes her letters, notes tucked away in the chaos of what will eventually be the Ice King's possession, notes in which he is achingly clear about what is happening. Notes in which he tells her he loves her, that what he feels for this small, strange child who appeared in the ruins is real love, the kind that doesn't require biology, the kind you choose. Notes in which he tells her that the crown is the only thing keeping him alive, and that the price of that life is himself, and that he is sorry. He chose to stay, even knowing the cost. The terrible paradox of his choice is that he stayed alive for her by becoming someone who could no longer properly be there for her. He preserved his body for her protection and destroyed his mind in the process. The love and the harm are inextricable from each other. You cannot untangle them to assign clean blame or clean credit. It is simply what it is. A person who loved someone and could not find a way to express that love without paying an impossible price. The Ice King is the end result of that choice. A figure who retains none of Simon's intelligence, warmth, memories, or love for Marceline, only his power over ice and snow, and a fractured, desperate need for affection that expresses itself in bizarre and harmful ways. The Ice King kidnaps princesses. He writes terrible poetry. He is, for most of the show's run, comic relief, a pathetic and occasionally creepy figure who means well in some vague, abstract sense but causes chaos wherever he goes. But knowing Simon is underneath that is like knowing that a perfectly preserved version of someone you loved is trapped behind a wall you cannot break through. The body is there. The face is there, more or less, in its altered way. The person is gone, but the container they inhabited keeps walking around, making demands, wearing glasses that are no longer necessary, and Marceline has to sit with that, has to see that face every time the Ice King appears, knowing what used to be behind it. It is a particular species of unresolved grief, one that has no clean object, because the person is not gone in the conventional sense. He is right there. The grieving feels somehow illegitimate. He is alive. He is present. And yet the person you loved is entirely inaccessible, and you cannot mourn them the way you would mourn a death, because the death has not happened. You cannot stop mourning them because the loss is absolutely real. And she does it. Year after year, for however many centuries the Ice King exists, she maintains some kind of contact with him. She checks on him. She is annoyed by him, genuinely and justifiably annoyed, and frustrated and occasionally devastated. But she doesn't abandon him. She keeps showing up for the ghost of the person he was. The episode I Remember You, one of the most emotionally precise episodes of television I have encountered in any genre, written and storyboarded by Rebecca Sugar and Cole Sanchez, shows us exactly what that keeping faith costs her. The Ice King shows up at Marceline's house wanting to write a song together. He brings notes and papers he has found among his things, without understanding what they are, presenting them to her as potential lyric inspiration. He has found Simon's letters, and Marceline looks down at the papers and recognizes the handwriting. She recognizes the apologies and the love and the careful, terrified documentation of a man watching himself disappear. She recognizes the letters as the things she has been waiting to find for centuries, arriving in the most agonizing possible context brought to her by the person who displaced the one who wrote them, who cannot understand what he is holding. The episode turns on this moment. Marceline tries, throughout the second half of it, to make the Ice King understand what she is showing him. Tries to make Simon surface through the madness. Fails. Over and over again, fails. He listens to the song she sings from Simon's letters, the song called Remember You, built directly from the language of his notes with genuine pleasure and no comprehension whatsoever. He hears a beautiful song about a man and a girl and thinks it is nice. He does not know it is about him. He does not know it is about her. He listens to his own story as if it were a stranger's. And Marceline breaks. Quietly, completely, she breaks. The tears come. And they are not dramatic or operatic. They are small and real and devastating, not the tears of surprise tragedy, but of a grief that has been accumulating for hundreds of years, normally held behind careful walls and the performance of not caring, and that comes flooding through now because the situation is simply too much to hold any longer. The episode ends on a flashback. Little Marceline, crying alone in the ruins. Simon finding her, crouching down, wiping her tears, giving her hambo. And his face there, warm, present, fully himself, is the face that the Ice King's face has been a ghost of ever since. The philosophical weight of this is worth dwelling on. What does it mean to lose someone to something other than death? Death has a clear boundary. The person was here, and now they are not. And while that is devastating, it is comprehensible. You know where the loss is. You can grieve in the direction of it. Simon's transformation creates something much harder to metabolize. The body is still there, the face is still there, the person is gone, but the container they inhabited is still walking around. And Marceline has to sit with that, has to maintain a relationship with this person who does not remember her, who cannot love her the way Simon did, because he cannot remember who she is to him. The eventual restoration of Simon in the series finale, when Betty's magic finally frees him from the crown, arrives after more than 1,000 years. It is one of the show's most hard-won emotional moments. He comes back. He is Simon again. He looks at her, And for a moment you can see the 1,000 years in her expression, the whole long weight of the waiting, arriving in a single look at a face she finally recognizes. She doesn't give a speech about it. She doesn't need to. The moment contains everything. Part 3. A Demon's Daughter. Let's talk about the fries. It sounds absurd to say that one of the emotional anchors of Marceline's character arc is a story about her father eating her French fries. And it is absurd, in the way that a lot of the deepest truths about human or half-demon emotional life are absurd when you reduce them to their bluntest, literal description. The fries are not really about the fries, they never were. To understand them, you need the context. Marceline was not a vampire yet at this point. She was a preteen, surviving in the post-apocalyptic world as a half-demon child with no particular special protections. She needed to eat, food was scarce. She had found something, some fries, in the wreckage, an absurdly specific and human thing to have survived the apocalypse, and was holding them in the way you hold something precious when you are hungry and food is rare. And her father, Hunson Abadir, the Lord of Evil, the deathless ruler of the Nightosphere, a being who sustains himself on consumed souls rather than physical nutrition, reached over and took them, without asking, without even thinking, really. The way you might absently take something off someone's plate without registering that you've done it, except that Hunson registered nothing because the concept of Marceline's need never crossed his awareness. He was there, physically present, and she was, to him, essentially absent. There is a specific kind of invisibility that is worse than being alone. Being alone, you know where you stand. Being invisible to someone who is supposed to see you being present with a parent who is looking through you rather than at you creates a particular wound that contains an extra element of betrayal. He was supposed to look. He was supposed to register her existence, her hunger, her needs. The fact that he didn't is not just an absence of care but a direct statement about her importance, whether he intended it as such or not. Hunson Abadir is not a straightforward villain. He is not coldly evil in the way the Lich is evil with coherent ideology and purpose behind it. Hunson's evil is more like a profound moral carelessness, a fundamental incapacity to consistently extend genuine care beyond himself. He loves Marceline. He does, by the show's clear accounting, genuinely love her. But loving someone and actually seeing them actually orienting your behavior around their real needs are different skills. And Hunson has never been required to develop the second one. He shows up in the aftermath of the Mushroom War, in a way that is almost parody of bad parenting. He smashes his way into Marceline's small hut with the family battle axe, an entrance that destroys what she has built, what she has made into her home, and then announces himself and suggests they go devour some souls together, as if this is a perfectly normal proposal to make to a child who has been surviving alone in a post-apocalyptic ruin. He does not ask how she is. He does not acknowledge what she has been through without him. He does not register the ruins around them as evidence of what she had to navigate in his absence. He just appears, massive and destroying, and assumes that his arrival is the important event. The Fry song, the song Marceline eventually writes about this, that she is still carrying and singing hundreds of years later, is both genuinely funny and genuinely heartbreaking. That is one of Adventure Time's particular genius qualities. The ability to hold humor and pain in the same moment without cheapening either one. The song is ridiculous, in the way that childhood grievances carried into adulthood can be ridiculous when you state them baldly. He ate my fries. I had them. He ate them, and I have not forgiven him for it. But the song underneath the song is the one in the full lyrics where Marceline asks why he left her, asks why he created her if he didn't want to see her, asks for the basic acknowledgement that she exists and that her existence matters to him. That is the real song. She cannot quite bring herself to sing it directly, so she sings it sideways, through a story about something small and concrete and easier to point at than the enormous ache underneath. The episode It Came from the Nightosphere plays out the parent-child dynamic with real precision and real pain. Hunson escapes into Ooh and goes on a soul-devouring rampage. Marceline tries to stop him not primarily to save Ooh, but because she wants her axe back. He took it. He called it a loot. He wasn't paying close enough attention to understand what she had made of it, what it meant to her, why it mattered. He is never entirely paying attention. The confrontation escalates until Finn, in desperation, plays back a recording of the Fry song, and Hunson freezes. He hears his daughter's voice singing her sideways grief at him, and something lands in him that direct argument never could. He understands, in that moment, what the fries were about. He apologizes. He tells her he loves her. He says he is proud of her. And Marceline, who has wanted to hear those specific words from this specific person for what feels like her entire existence, deflects immediately. She says it's fine. She says it doesn't really matter. She softens, awkwardly, unsure what to do with the receiving of the thing she has been wanting. Because that is what happens when you have wanted something for a very long time and then suddenly have it. The wanting was familiar. The receiving is strange. She is not prepared to be given what she was waiting for. The defenses that were built to manage the absence of that recognition don't know how to reconfigure for its presence. So they do what defenses do, they minimize, they deflect, they say it's fine, it doesn't matter, it was a long time ago. It does matter. It did matter. It always mattered. The fries were the thing she could point at. The love she needed, the specific attention, the sustained recognition, the parent who genuinely sees the person in front of him, rather than the role he wants that person to fill. That was the thing she couldn't point at directly, without making herself fully visible in a way that felt dangerous. In Daddy's Little Monster, Hunson tries to trick her into taking over the Nightosphere, wearing the amulet that would transform her into the new ruler of evil, framing it as recognizing her potential, as giving her what she deserves. And Marceline calls him on it directly. She tells him she wants him to be proud of who she wants to be, not who he wants her to be. The distinction is the whole distance between being loved and being used, between being seen and being projected onto. The axe base, in this context, carries enormous symbolic weight. It is a weapon, the family battle axe, something connected to the Abadir legacy, to power expressed through destruction. And Marceline took it and converted it into a musical instrument. She added strings, made it sing. She took her inheritance, the thing passed down from the father who did not see her, and transformed it into the tool she uses to be seen. She literally restrung the weapon of her lineage. And the fact that Hunson still calls it a lute, still does not understand what she has made of it, is a perpetually renewed symbol of the gap between them. He sees what it was, she has made it into what it is. That conversion is an act of quiet philosophical reclamation. She took what the demon lineage gave her and made it serve her own expression rather than her father's purposes. She refused the weapon and made the song instead, and the song is how she tells the truth. Part 4. The Vampire Queen. Somewhere in the long years between the Mushroom War and the present day of Adventure Time, Marceline became a vampire. The Stakes miniseries fills in the details, and they are worth walking through carefully because they reveal something important about what kind of vampire she is and what kind of identity that involves. In the years after she lost both her mother and, eventually, the recognizable version of Simon after the Ice King's persona had advanced far enough that Simon could no longer properly care for her, Marceline survived alone in the ruined, monster-filled post-war world. The land of Oo was still figuring out what it was. The scattered remnants of humanity were still alive in small, vulnerable communities. Vampires were among the most significant threats to their survival. Marceline fought them. She was a half-demon with real combat capability, stronger and faster than a human, with powers inherited from the Nightosphere side of her heritage. And each time she killed a vampire by draining their essence, she absorbed something from them. The souls and powers of the Fool, the Empress, the Hierophant, the Moon, each killed and absorbed, accumulated in her over the years. She was not becoming a vampire by being bitten, she was becoming one through accumulation, through the very act of protecting others. The Moon's power is particularly significant. Moon vampires could walk in sunlight, and absorbing that power gave Marceline something rare among her kind, a partial resistance to daylight. She describes it in the show as comparable to scraping her knee. Still uncomfortable, still a reminder of what she is, but survivable. She carries the powers of the monsters she defeated like armor built from their fallen natures. And then the Vampire King himself. He is the oldest and most powerful of all of them, and what makes him genuinely formidable is not just his power but his philosophy. He has watched the cycle of history from an immortal perspective long enough to have arrived at a genuine and complete worldview, however dark that worldview might be. He believes, with the calm certainty of someone who has seen enough to know, that history is a wheel. Everything repeats. The patterns of behavior in conscious beings do not change across eras because individuals live and die too quickly to accumulate the perspective needed to see their own patterns. The wheel turns. The faces change, the behavior does not. Marceline defeats him. She absorbs his essence. She becomes the last of the vampires, the vampire queen not through lineage or election or desire, but through the logic of combat and the consequence of survival. She did not choose this. She became it by being the last one standing. What does immortality do to a person? The physical fact of it is this: your body stops changing. The aging that would otherwise continue, the slow accumulation of physical change, the body's movement toward deterioration and death simply stops. You remain. The world continues. You watch it continue from inside a body that is doing the same thing it was doing the day you were changed. Marceline's apparent age at that point was roughly that of a late teenager or early 20-something. She was a child when the war ended, which means some years passed between the apocalypse and her vampirism years she spent growing up in the post-war ruins, becoming a fighter and a survivor and eventually a vampire hunter. She got those years. She got to grow from the small girl in the rubble to something closer to the Marceline we recognize. And then she stopped, and has remained that age for approximately 1,000 years. Think about what that means in psychological terms, rather than just physical ones. She was a teenager or close to it when the world was ending, and everyone around her was dying, and she was building her survival strategies and her emotional defenses. Those defenses were laid down in a period of enormous crisis, with limited tools and limited support and a great deal of fear. They are trauma responses, in many ways. Ways of surviving that were genuinely necessary at the time. And then she is immortal. And the world slowly recovers and becomes ooh. And the trauma responses are still there, still running, still shaping her behavior because the person who developed them stopped aging before she had the chance to outgrow them in the ordinary way that people grow through difficult periods. She is, in a significant psychological sense, a messed up kid in a 1,000-year-old body, frozen at the moment of her trauma, in the way that trauma tends to freeze people at the developmental stage where they encountered it. That is uncomfortable to sit with. The image of Marceline as powerful and ancient and fearsome, the vampire queen, leather jacket, axe base, floating in her cave surrounded by relics of centuries is true. And it coexists with the image of Marceline as someone who is still, underneath all of that, working out problems she developed when she was very young. Both of those things are simultaneously true. And that simultaneous truth is part of what makes her feel so recognizably human, despite being a half-demon vampire. The immortality also means something for her relationships. Everyone she gets close to, with some exceptions, will age. They will grow and change and eventually die while she continues. She has already watched this happen many times over. And there is a specific grief in that which has no ordinary name because humans don't usually have to experience it. The grief of being the survivor, not of a single event, but of every event, of living long enough to outlast everyone, of knowing every time you let someone matter to you exactly how this is going to end for them. The Vampire King in Stakes says something to Marceline that cuts directly to the center of this experience. He asks her what she has noticed about the world in all the centuries she has been watching it, and she answers with the devastating simplicity of someone who has had more than enough time to arrive at the answer. Everything repeats over and over, and no one learns anything because no one lives long enough to see the pattern. That is Nietzsche's eternal return made personal, made lived, made into not a thought experiment but a direct report from someone who has actually experienced it. The wheel turns. The faces change. She watches. Part 5. Music as blood. Let's talk about the axe base properly, because it deserves more than a passing mention. It is one of the most carefully constructed symbolic objects in the show, something that carries enormous thematic weight across every appearance, that tells you something specific about Marceline's philosophy and her psychology and her relationship to her own history every single time it appears on screen. The axe base was originally a weapon, a family battle axe, something associated with the Abadir lineage, with the demon side of Marceline's heritage, built for violence and implying destruction as its primary function. And at some point, Marceline took it and converted it. She added strings, she added a headstock, and machine heads and frets and pickups. Turned a 4-sided battle axe into a 4-string bass guitar. Made it sing. Her father, when he sees it, calls it a lute. He doesn't understand what she has done to it. He doesn't understand the transformation. He sees a weapon with strings attached. She sees the thing she uses to speak, because that is what the axe base is for Marceline. It is her most reliable form of communication, the channel through which she says the things she cannot say directly. Her feelings about Simon live in "Remember You." Her grief about her father lives in the Fry song. Her complicated love for Princess Bubblegum lives in I'm Just Your Problem. Her relationship with change and permanence and what it means to be yourself across centuries lives in Everything Stays. The music is not decoration around the emotions. The music is the emotions, given a form that is safer than the raw feeling, more shapeable, more transmissible. There is a real tradition of this in human experience. Music especially has this quality because it operates on a register that bypasses the careful, guarded parts of us. You can listen to a song and feel something moving in your chest before your conscious mind has quite caught up with what's happening. The emotion arrives directly, without passing through the layer of interpretation and self-protection that direct verbal communication requires. For Marceline, who has spent 1,000 years developing sophisticated defenses against being hurt, who learned young that letting people in fully is dangerous because they tend to leave or disappear or become unrecognizable, music is the one place where she allows herself to be unguarded. She will tell you in a song what she will never tell you in conversation. She will be vulnerable in performance in ways she cannot be vulnerable in person. This paradox is interesting and worth examining. Performance is public. It is, in a literal sense, more exposed than private conversation. And yet for Marceline, it is the safer form. Why? Because in performance, she has control over the shape of what she is saying. She has worked the raw feeling into a structured thing, a song, with a beginning and a melody and an end, with words chosen carefully and arranged deliberately. The emotion has been managed. Not diminished, not made less real, if anything, more precisely real, more exactly her but given form. It has been made into something that can be shared without leaving her completely exposed. There is the song, and there is Marceline, and the song stands between them like a beautiful, transparent shield. The Fry song illustrates this beautifully. She describes it to Finn as really personal, and then she sings it in front of him. She won't explain the full weight of her feelings about her father directly, but she will perform them. The performance is a safer form of intimacy than direct statement. And even after she sings it, even after Finn clearly understands that it is about something real and deep, she holds on to the deflection. It's just a song. She was just letting off steam. She keeps the distance that the song itself was closing. In What Was Missing, she sings I'm Just Your Problem, addressed transparently to Bubblegum in a group setting, and the song contains more direct emotional honesty than she has ever expressed toward Bubblegum in ordinary conversation. The song does what Marceline cannot do in that moment. It admits the relationship, admits that it matters, admits the specific texture of the hurt and the love that underlies it. She would never say those words speaking. She can sing them. Her voice is part of this too. Olivia Olson gives Marceline a voice that is distinctive and deeply specific. A rich, slightly rough timbre with real texture to it, something that sounds like it has been lived in for a long time. It is not conventionally pretty in the way that a lot of animated voice performances reach for. It sounds weathered and warm simultaneously. It sounds like someone who has used it through grief and joy and centuries of being alive, who has not kept it pristine, but has let it acquire the character that comes from actually living in a thing. The range of what Marceline sings across the show's run is remarkable. She sings about grief and abandonment and love and loss and identity and anger and longing and acceptance and fear in styles that move between acoustic folk and punk and slow ballad and something that doesn't fit any single genre cleanly. The music is not incidental to who she is, it is how she was made. Her mother sang her lullabies. The impulse to convert feeling into sound and give it structure, the habit of music as emotional processing that came from Elise. It was given to her by the one person who loved her most completely and who was taken from her earliest. Everything Stays is the song that contains the most complete version of Marceline's philosophy, folded into a lullaby too soft to seem like it's doing anything heavy. The lyrics are about change and permanence, how things change on the surface while something underneath remains constant. How the underside of a leaf, turned away from the light, stays pale even as the topside darkens. How you can turn a thing upside down and find a different version of what was always there. Her mother sang it to comfort her about her weird dreams and Elise's reassurance that something weird might just be something familiar, seen from a different angle, is itself a piece of philosophy that Marceline carries for 1,000 years. Not, this scary thing is fine actually, but rather, the angle you're seeing it from makes it look scary. Try a different angle. See if you can find the familiar thing underneath the strange surface. Marceline sang Everything Stays to Herself at the end of the Stakes miniseries, after death and resurrection and the re-choosing of the identity she had tried to shed. She sang it in the moment of completion, having come all the way around and found herself back where she started, but different, turned upside down, the underside lighter than she remembered. The axe base, by the time of the Distant Lands special obsidian, gets shattered, literally broken during the conflict with the Glass Kingdom dragon, broken in a fight rooted in the old history between Marceline and Bubblegum. The heirloom weapon instrument she has carried through 1,000 years is gone, and what replaces it is a new base still hers, still the same instrument in function, but built differently, not the family weapon remade, something entirely her own, from the beginning. The instrument can change. The music cannot stop being what it is to her. The thing her mother gave her is still there, underneath everything. It cannot be broken, because it is not an object. It is a way of being in the world. Part 6. I'm Just Your Problem. The relationship between Marceline and Princess Bubblegum is one of the most carefully constructed emotional arcs in modern Western animation, and the care it was given across a decade of storytelling, navigating network restrictions and fan expectation, and the writer's own evolving vision is evident in how rewarding it is when it finally arrives fully into the light. Let us be clear about what we know. They knew each other before the show begins. Before Finn and Jake, before any of the main events of the series, Marceline and Bonnibel Bubblegum had a romantic relationship confirmed eventually in the series finale when they kiss on screen, and explored in much greater depth in the Distant Lands special Obsidian. They were together, for a while, in the early years of Princess Bubblegum's time building and governing the Candy Kingdom. And then something went wrong. What went wrong is complicated, and both of them bear responsibility for it, which is one of the more mature and honest things about how the show handles it. This is not a story where one person was simply wrong and the other simply wronged. It is a story about two people who both had significant emotional problems, rooted in their respective traumas, and the specific psychological costs of their unusual existences, who were not yet equipped to be what the other needed. Princess Bubblegum's defining challenge, as Adventure Time understands it, is control. She is a scientific genius, a political ruler, a deeply anxious person who manages her anxiety by exerting control over her environment and the people in it. She believes, with genuine conviction, that she is the only one who can make the right decisions for her kingdom, that her judgment is the most reliable available, that things will go wrong if she lets go. And so she doesn't let go. She micromanages. She makes decisions for people rather than with them, justifying it internally as care and expressing it outwardly in ways that feel, to the recipient, like being managed rather than being loved. For someone like Marceline, who has profound sensitivity about whether she is being genuinely seen or simply being used, who learned what it feels like to have someone present who isn't attending to you, Princess Bubblegum's controlling tendencies land directly on an existing wound. It felt, or it came to feel, like Bubblegum was loving a version of Marceline rather than Marceline herself, like she was being kept at a distance even inside the relationship. And Marceline's own patterns, the avoidance, the walls, the preemptive emotional exit strategies, the tendency to push people away before they can leave on their own, made her a difficult person to stay close to. When things got hard, she withdrew or detonated rather than engaging. She made repair difficult. She required a kind of patience and persistence that even someone without Bubblegum's own issues might have struggled to provide. Two people with deep wounds, moving toward each other and then away, each seeing accurately the other's problem while being somewhat less clear-eyed about their own. The song I'm Just Your Problem, which Marceline sings in What Was Missing, ostensibly about a door lord who stole something of hers, is transparently about more than a theft. The lyrics address someone who won't acknowledge what they mean to each other, who sees Marceline as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be genuinely with. The anger in the song is real. Underneath the anger is hurt. Underneath the hurt is love, the frustrated, complicated, ancient love of someone who has been trying to be seen by a specific person for a very long time. What makes I'm Just Your Problem so effective as storytelling is its indirection. The Door Lord plotline gives Marceline a surface object for the song. She can tell herself she is singing about an annoying magical entity rather than about the person across the room who she has unfinished emotional business with going back years. It is the Fry song strategy deployed again. Sing the thing you cannot say directly. Princess Bubblegum's reaction to the song, the fact that she clearly recognizes herself in it, that she responds with her own quietly honest musical moment confirms what we suspected. Both of them know. Neither of them can quite say it plainly. Obsidian shows us the breakup. We see a past version of Marceline and Bubblegum fighting a fight that escalates, as long-festering conflicts tend to escalate, beyond the immediate issue into the whole accumulated weight of everything unresolved between them. All the ways they have mishandled each other. All the places where the love got twisted by the fear into something damaging. Marceline sings a song in the middle of the argument that essentially ends the relationship. She sings it at Bubblegum rather than to her, not an attempt at communication but an act of detonation. She is blowing up what is already broken rather than continuing to hold the broken pieces together with increasing strain. The axe base shatters, and then they are done. What follows is years of distance. Long enough for the absence to settle into something that feels like the new normal. Long enough for both of them to build lives that accommodate the gap. The thing about this breakup, as the show frames it, is that neither of them is straightforwardly wrong. Marceline is right that Bubblegum holds her at a distance. Bubblegum is right that Marceline has her own avoidance tendencies and doesn't make connection easy. They are both protecting themselves at the expense of the relationship, because both of them are fundamentally frightened. Marceline is frightened of being left, of the loss that has come for everyone she has let herself fully need. Bubblegum is frightened of being insufficient, of caring about someone and not being able to be what they need, of the vulnerability of letting something matter. Two people who are afraid, in different directions, failing to bridge the distance between them. And the fear is not weakness, it is the rational response to their histories. It makes complete sense, for both of them, and it still costs them years. What makes the eventual resolution feel earned is that both of them have to grow before they can genuinely reach each other. Bubblegum has to learn to let go of control, to trust people rather than managing them, to express love without directing. Marceline has to learn to stay, to not run when things get difficult, to trust that people who say they love her might mean it across the long term. The apartment they share in Obsidian is the evidence. They built furniture together. They have small, mundane rhythms of domestic cohabitation. They navigate disagreements without explosions. They are imperfect and present, which is the only kind of love that actually lasts. Part 7. Everything Repeats. Stakes is an 8-episode miniseries that aired in November 2015, and it is one of the finest concentrated pieces of storytelling that Adventure Time ever produced. It is the most explicitly philosophical extended narrative in the show's run, a direct engagement with questions about mortality, identity, fate, and what it means to choose the life you have over the life you might have preferred. The premise? Marceline, tired of being a vampire, asks Princess Bubblegum to extract the vampiric essence from her and restore her to mortality. Bubblegum performs the procedure. The vampiric essence that is removed escapes containing the absorbed souls of the powerful vampires Marceline killed in the post-war years and reconstitutes those vampires. The Fool, the Empress, the Hierophant, the Moon, and the Vampire King. Marceline, now mortal, has to face each of them again. Each vampire she refights represents something from her past she has not fully processed. The Hierophant is bound to her sense of inherited obligation. The Empress is connected to her tendency toward isolation and using power to keep others at a distance. The Moon represents the dream of safety, of existing in sunlight without pain, of a life without constant management of a monster's restrictions. The Fool represents the recklessness of youth, the leaping before looking. Each battle is simultaneously a literal fight and a psychological confrontation with a part of her history. The structure of the miniseries is not subtle about this. The vampires represent aspects of what she has been, and defeating them again is a way of deciding, consciously, what to carry forward and what to set down. The central confrontation, the one around which everything else orbits, is with the Vampire King. He is not simply an antagonist. He is the philosophical endpoint of immortality taken to its logical conclusion. What you become if the long view of history cures you completely of any belief in the value of individual moments. He has been watching the wheel turn for so long that he has achieved a kind of serenity about it. Not the serenity of peace, but the serenity of detachment, of having evacuated caring so thoroughly that nothing can hurt him anymore, because nothing matters to him anymore. His proposal to Marceline is essentially, join me in this detachment. Accept that the cycle is unbreakable. Stop investing. Stop caring whether things turn out one way or another. The wheel will turn regardless. the faces will change. Nothing you do will alter the fundamental pattern. So float above it. Stop being someone to whom things happen and become someone who merely observes. There is a real philosophical position underneath this. It has genuine resonance with certain readings of Stoicism, with Buddhist concepts of non-attachment. The idea that suffering comes from the mismatch between what you want and what is, and that eliminating the wanting eliminates the suffering. This is not incoherent. It is even, in a limited sense, a kind of wisdom. But Adventure Time is very clear about what this particular expression of that wisdom costs. It costs everything that makes existence meaningful. It costs connection, engagement, the ability to be moved. The Vampire King is invulnerable to suffering because he is invulnerable to the things that make suffering possible, which are the same things that make joy possible, and love possible, and meaning possible. He has solved the problem of pain by eliminating the self that could feel it. That is not a solution. That is a different kind of death, slower and quieter, and dressed as philosophy. Marceline's counter is not an articulate philosophical argument. She does not win by out-reasoning him. She wins by being the opposite of what he has become, by still caring, still being someone to whom things happen, still being embedded in specific relationships with specific people who matter to her specifically. She fights him not because she has solved the problem of immortality, but because she loves these people. And that love is not revocable just because the situation is difficult. The dream sequences during Stakes are revelatory of her deepest desires. When she is poisoned and lying close to death, she dreams of growing old. She dreams of wrinkles and gray hair and a body that shows its age. She dreams of aging alongside Princess Bubblegum, both of them old together. The dream is not a nightmare, it is a wish. The most deeply encoded desire in Marceline's unconscious is not for power or eternity or freedom from the vampire's limitations. It is for the ordinary human experience of being mortal alongside the people she loves. This is heartbreaking because what she wants is the one thing her nature most fundamentally denies her. She is built for permanence in a world where everything else is temporary, and what she dreams of is being temporary alongside everyone else. When she reabsorbs the Vampire King's essence and becomes a vampire again at the miniseries end, she does so with something she did not have before acceptance. Not joy, not celebration, not the pretense that it's fine. Genuine acceptance. She tells Bubblegum that now they can hang out forever. The line is both funny and real, self-aware and genuine simultaneously. It is a reframing of the inescapable. Yes, she is immortal, but the person in front of her is not going anywhere soon either. And there is something to make of that fact, even under the longer shadow. The philosophical concept the academic literature on Stakes returns to consistently is Nietzsche's eternal return, and the response to it that Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate. The idea is not that you stop being aware of the difficulty of existence. The idea is that you say yes to it anyway. You affirm your life as it is, including the repetitions and the losses, understanding them as constitutive of the thing you are affirming. Not, I love my existence despite what it is, but I love my existence because it is specifically mine, with all its specific weight. Marceline doesn't arrive at a full amor fati at the end of Stakes. That would be too clean for a story that understands how these things actually move in people. But she moves from fighting her nature to choosing it. And that movement, that shift from resistance to ownership, is something significant. In a 1,000-year life, that is a great deal. Jake delivers what is arguably the central philosophical statement of the whole miniseries. When Marceline is near death and Bubblegum is blaming herself, Jake tells her, Marcy took a risk and you helped her because you're her friend. Real friends take each other to the edge of death, because death is life. Death is life. The finitude that makes things matter. The mortality or the awareness of it, even for someone technically immortal, that gives the present moment its specific gravity. Marceline knows death because she has seen it everywhere, over and over for 1,000 years. She knows it will find everyone she loves, and she chooses love anyway. That choice, made with full knowledge of what it costs, is what the miniseries is ultimately arguing is the answer. Part 8, Obsidian and After. There is a version of Marceline's story that ends with Stakes. The arc is complete. The young girl who survived the apocalypse, who lost everyone, who became a monster against her will, who spent centuries building walls against the pain of connection, she finally chooses herself and the people around her, fully and without reservation. Adventure Time is not that kind of show. It understands that healing is not a destination but an ongoing negotiation. The version of a person who has done real psychological work is not finished. They are a living thing that continues to be challenged and continues to have to choose. Obsidian, the second Distant Land special, takes place years after the events of the main show. Marceline and Bubblegum are together, properly and openly, building a life together. They have furniture they built together, disagreements about small things, the particular intimacy of two people who know each other very well and have chosen, repeatedly and consciously, to keep knowing each other. And then they are called to the Glass Kingdom. The title Obsidian is not incidental. Obsidian is volcanic glass, protective, absorbing, capable of great hardness. It can be weaponized. And the metaphor relates precisely to what we see of Marceline and Bubblegum's relationship. Protective, absorbing, formed from tremendous heat, dark in the way that doesn't let light through easily. The Glass Kingdom is a place whose entire culture is organized around the prevention of cracking. The beings there are made of glass, and a crack in one's glass is the greatest possible shame evidence of fragility, of weakness, of having been in contact with something that could break you. The kingdom maintains its smooth, uncracked surfaces through conformity and the suppression of any behavior that might produce fracture. Everyone is expected to be perfect, unbroken, smooth. Evidence of having encountered difficulty is to be hidden, treated, erased. Glass Boy, the young protagonist of the subplot, has cracks in his face. He has been told his whole life that these cracks are catastrophic, that they mark him as defective. He hides them. He is ashamed. He believes that if people see him as he is, they will see something less than they should. Marceline knows what this is. She has been living it for 1,000 years. The leather jacket, the not-caring, the vampire queen menace, these have been her version of the Glass Kingdom's smooth surface. Don't show the cracks. Don't let people see the breaks. Perform the unbroken surface and keep the damaged places hidden. Because the world, in her experience, had not been reliably kind about accepting damage. The Obsidian plot requires Marceline to return to the Glass Kingdom because a dragon she accidentally put there centuries ago is waking up a dragon that fell into enchanted sleep because young Marceline sang it a song during a fight. With Bubblegum, a song that came from the height of their conflict. The dragon has been sleeping under the Glass Kingdom for all this time, disturbing the ground above it. The metaphor is precise. What you don't resolve doesn't disappear. It goes underground and sleeps there and keeps the ground above it unstable. You can build over an unhealed wound, but the wound remains active, affecting everything above it. The Glass Kingdom built itself on top of Marceline's unprocessed grief, on top of the song she sang in the worst moment of her relationship, on top of the thing she never fully reckoned with, and now it is trembling from the inside. Obsidian gives us more of Elise than the main show ever provided. We see Elise hiding her illness, we see her sending Marceline forward with the lie about the clubhouse, and we see, for the first time fully, the weight of what that cost, not just what it cost Marceline to be left, but what it cost Elise to leave. The love of the choice and the grief of it, and the way a loving act can produce a wound in someone else that takes centuries to understand. This is one of the most sophisticated things Obsidian adds to Marceline's story. It requires her and the audience to hold a more complex understanding of that original abandonment. Elise did not fail Marceline. Elise made a devastating choice in love, and the choice left a mark. Both things are true. The love and the wound coexist, and understanding that coexistence, holding both without resolving one into the other, is part of what Marceline has to do to be fully herself. The resolution in the Glass Kingdom involves Marceline singing the song that woke the dragon, not to put it back to sleep, but to face what the song was about, to acknowledge the fight, to let the Glass Kingdom see what cracks look like when you don't hide them, when you carry them openly and claim them as your own history. Glass Boy sees this. He sees a being who has 1,000 years of cracks, visible and invisible, healed and not, and who is still standing, still singing, still choosing to be present. His cracks are not damage to be hidden, they are information. They are the record of having been in contact with a world that is harder than he is, and having survived it. Marceline knows this from her own long negotiation with her history. She is all crack in the best sense. She has been broken, repeatedly, and has knit back together, and each knitting leaves a mark. And she is more herself for it. More interesting. More genuinely alive, not biologically but experientially, relationally, in her capacity to be moved. The version of Marceline in Obsidian is recognizably the same person as the girl in the rubble, and recognizably different. She has the same dark hair, the same floating, the same deadpan humor and moments of sudden softness, but she is less defended. She checks herself in the old arguments, notices when the old pattern is activating, when the old urge to destroy before she can be destroyed is rising, and chooses differently. Not perfectly, but differently. And that difference, small as it looks from the outside, represents the accumulation of 1,000 years of gradual, difficult, imperfect learning. Part 9. The Philosophy of Being a Monster. Let's spend some time with the word monster, because it is a word that orbits Marceline constantly and deserves more careful attention than it usually gets. She calls herself one sometimes. She is called one by others. The show's introduction of her, the episode Evicted, frames her initially as a figure who displaces Finn and Jake from their home, who seems to enjoy causing discomfort, who uses her power in ways that feel threatening. She is performing something in those early episodes. A persona. The vampire queen, leather jacket, dark humor, a relish in being uncanny and unsettling. But Adventure Time is always asking what monster means, and who decides, and whether the category contains what people assume it contains. Consider what Marceline is, factually. She absorbs the color red from things, which can include blood. She can transform into alarming shapes. She can raise the dead. She has fangs and floats, and is damaged by direct sunlight. She is, by the taxonomy of folklore, a vampire. The word the tradition assigns to beings like her is monster. But the show is consistently interested in the gap between what something is called and what it is. The monster category, in Adventure Time, is assigned to beings who cause harm, but the show complicates that assignment by asking who is causing harm, to whom, under what circumstances, and with what intention. Marceline has lived in the space between categories her entire existence. She is half demon and half human, neither fully one nor the other. She is a vampire who hunted vampires to protect humans, simultaneously a monster and a monster slayer. She is the heir to the Nightosphere who has zero desire to fulfill that role. She does not fit any single category cleanly. She never has. And the show suggests that not fitting being that the categories cannot contain is not a flaw. It is a kind of freedom, even when it is also a burden. The beings who most clearly cannot be reduced to a single category have the most complex and difficult lives, but they also have direct access to a truth that the neatly categorized miss. Categories are tools for organizing experience. They are not descriptions of essential nature. The monster she performs in early episodes is a mask, or more precisely, it is one real facet of a self that has many facets. It is the facet that is most useful for maintaining distance, for keeping people at arm's length before they can decide to leave on their own. Better to be frightening than to be seen and then rejected. Better to push first than to be left without warning. The monster persona is the preemptive strike of someone who has experienced abandonment so many times that abandonment feels inevitable. This is a specific kind of loneliness, the loneliness of someone whose defenses are so effective that they work against connection even when connection is what you want. You build the wall to protect yourself and then discover that the wall also keeps out what you most need. And dismantling the wall requires vulnerability that is genuinely terrifying because the wall was built for good reason. The things it was built to keep out were real. The episode Henchman is one of the early illustrations of the gap between Marceline's performed persona and her actual behavior. Finn is convinced she is evil. She has been ordering him to do things that seem terrible, and he has been performing increasingly distressed compliance. And then he sees the truth. She has been protecting a flower from wilting, sending him on errands while she quietly does acts of care that she refuses to let anyone see her doing directly. She performs not caring so thoroughly that she has to hide when she cares. She would rather be thought a monster than be caught being kind. This concealment reveals something essential about her relationship to vulnerability. Being kind is being exposed. Being kind says, I have softness in me. I have things that can be reached. I can be moved by small and fragile things. And someone who has been hurt as consistently as Marceline has been hurt is understandably reluctant to broadcast that she can be hurt. Finn's particular value in Marceline's life, his specific and unrepeatable contribution to her arc, is that he is cheerfully and completely unintimidated by the performance. He keeps showing up. He keeps being friendly, keeps offering genuine warmth, keeps failing to respond to the cues that say, stay away. He is not bravely defying her menace, he simply does not operate from a framework that requires her to be threatening. He sees a person and treats her as one, without making a project of it, without requiring anything from her in return. That refusal to be scared of her, extended without demand or agenda, is quietly revolutionary to someone who has spent centuries being treated as a category. Being believed and being related to as a person whose existence is not contingent on behaving like a particular kind of entity changes something. It offers a different kind of mirror, one that shows something other than monster and asks, "Is this the only thing you are?" No, it is not. The monster is real. But the monster is not all of it. And Marceline has always known this and rarely been in a situation where the knowing could be acknowledged out loud. Part 10. What 1,000 years teaches you. We have come a long way. From the little girl in the rubble, eating her candy bar while the world was still settling after its ending, to the woman floating in her cave, playing her axe bass to an empty room, carrying 1,000 years of love and loss and music in a body that has not aged a day since the world went quiet the first time. What does 1,000 years teach you? What does that much time, with that much experience, deposited into a single consciousness that was formed in disaster and has been running on improvised survival strategies ever since? What does it actually give you? It gives you, first, pattern recognition. She has watched empires build and collapse. She has watched relationships cycle through the same stages with different faces. She has seen the same fears and the same longings and the same failures of courage and the same unexpected moments of grace express themselves across centuries, in different costumes, through different cultural vocabularies, always recognizably the same underneath. The pattern is not comforting. There is something genuinely discouraging about watching the wheel turn enough times to know it is a wheel, but there is also a kind of perspective in it. When you have seen enough iterations of a thing, you know that the current one is not the final one. Catastrophes pass. Periods of darkness give way to something else. Even the Mushroom War, which seemed like the absolute terminus of everything human, turned out to be a beginning of a world that is strange and candy-colored and full of mathematical princesses and talking dogs and small human children in bear hats who turn out to be the greatest heroes anyone could have asked for. The world did not end, even when it ended. That is something 1,000 years teaches you, the continuity beneath the discontinuity. The way things that seem like absolute endings are often just transitions between forms. The way the thing that felt like it would break you permanently eventually becomes just one of the layers of your history, one of the ingredients of who you became. It teaches you about love, what love costs and what it is worth. Marceline has loved people who were taken from her. Her mother, Simon, in the person he was before the crown took him. The scattered communities of humans she protected in the post-war years who aged and died while she remained. She has loved people who hurt her without meaning to, and people who hurt her while meaning to, and people who simply could not bridge the distance between their capacity and her need. She has loved Princess Bubblegum across a long arc that includes separation and misunderstanding and growth and reunion and the ongoing daily work of choosing each other. And she keeps doing it. She keeps choosing love even knowing the cost, even knowing that the cost is real and ongoing and never finished. Even knowing that the specific shape of her grief, the immortal watching the mortal world change without her changing, is not something that resolves, only something that you find ways to live inside. She has every reason to stop. She has been given enough loss to justify a permanent and complete withdrawal from the risk of connection. The case for closing off is genuinely rational. She has the data. She knows what happens when you let people matter. They leave or they change or the world takes them, or something happens that you cannot prevent and will have to carry afterward. But she doesn't close off. Not completely, not finally. She always leaves a door. The music is the door. The performances where she says what she will not say directly. The way she shows up for the Ice King even when he cannot understand why she is there. The way she keeps the family axe and strings it and carries it everywhere even though her father didn't understand what she made of it. The way she watches over human communities from a distance in the years when she cannot bring herself to be part of anything. She is always underneath the not caring, paying attention. She is always underneath the not needing, keeping track. This is love as a practice rather than as a feeling. Not the rush of it, which comes and goes and is not always available, but the discipline of it, the repeated choice to show up, to stay, to maintain connection even when it is inconvenient or painful, or going through a period of being very difficult and barely working. The showing up is not always comfortable. Sometimes it looks like checking in on someone who doesn't remember you matter to them. Sometimes it looks like making music in an empty cave because the impulse to make music is the impulse to be alive, and you are going to do it regardless of whether anyone hears. Sometimes it looks like choosing the person in front of you over the ideal of freedom, accepting the limitation of your own nature for the sake of the specific love it would cost you to escape it. Simon taught her this, without meaning to, by doing it first. He wore the crown for her. He chose to stay even when staying cost him everything. He wrote letters in the knowledge that she might never find them, maintained faith with her across his own disappearance, and she maintained faith with him in return, across his transformation, across centuries of the Ice King who wore his face and didn't know her. That mutual faithfulness practiced across incomprehensibility and time and transformation is one of the show's most complete portraits of what devotion actually means. Not the feeling of devotion, but the practice of it. The repeated choice, over and over, in circumstances that don't make it easy. Adventure Time, at its philosophical core, is a show about what it means to live. What it means to be conscious in a universe that is enormous and frequently indifferent, in a world that is dangerous and strange and occasionally breathtaking, in a body that is mortal or immortal or something in between. It asks what things are worth and how you figure that out when the universe provides no answer keys, and it gives its audience complex, honest material to work with. Marceline is the show's most sustained engagement with this project. She is the oldest of the main characters, the one who has spent the most time working out what a life is worth and how to live one that does not hollow you out. And the answer she arrives at slowly, across years of storytelling and 1,000 years of fictional history, is something like this. The worth is in the staying, in the choosing to remain present with people, with yourself, with a world that is going to keep changing and keep being difficult and keep offering you reasons to withdraw. The worth is in the love that you practice even when the loving is hard, in the music you make even when no one is listening, because the making is itself an act of presence. In the way you carry the people who shaped you, your mother's lullaby, your surrogate father's warmth given before it was taken, your demon father's axe restrung and reshaped into something that serves a different purpose as a living inheritance rather than a dead weight. Being 1,000 years old and still capable of being surprised by a feeling, being a monster by some definitions and a person by every definition that actually matters. Being the last vampire and also just someone who is working out, day by day and century by century, how to exist in a world that did not quite prepare for her particular combination of things. She is not a finished thing. That is the last and maybe most important philosophical insight that her story offers. She is not a lesson wrapped up and concluded. She is not the moral at the end of the fable. She is a person in process. In Obsidian, she is a different version of herself than she was in Evicted. More honest, more willing to be seen, more capable of receiving love without immediately scanning for the exit. But she is still Marceline, still floating, still playing the bass, still finding ways to say the things she can't quite say directly. Everything stays, and everything changes. The underside lighter when you turn it around. 1,000 years of choosing to be present. 1,000 years of practicing the discipline of love in circumstances that repeatedly made that discipline feel unreasonable. 1,000 years of making music in the dark because the impulse to create is the impulse to be alive, and she is, stubbornly, always, going to be alive. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the only large thing there is. Marceline, the vampire queen half-demon, last of the vampires, daughter of a demon lord and a human woman who sang to her in the ruins of the world, is, in the end, a portrait of what it looks like to survive, not just physically but emotionally. To keep the capacity for love intact across loss and time and the endless repetition of a world that doesn't quite know what to do with you. She is 1,000 years old. She still reaches toward the people who matter to her. She is still learning how. She still gets it wrong sometimes. She still has days when the weight of all that time presses down and the stubborn act of continuing feels like more than it should have to be. And then she picks up the bass, and she plays Part 11. The 1,000-year weight of memory. There is something that does not get talked about enough when people discuss Marceline, what it actually means, at a neurological and psychological level, to remember 1,000 years of life. Human beings struggle to remember what they had for breakfast 3 Thursdays ago. Memory is not a recording device. It is a reconstructive system that reshapes itself constantly, that is influenced by emotion and context and subsequent experience, that discards vast quantities of information and holds on to a small, biased selection of what we have lived through. Most people, if they try to recall a day from 10 years ago, find that the majority of it has simply dissolved. What remains are fragments, an image, a feeling, the specific sensation of something that mattered. Marceline has 1,000 years of this, 1,000 years of fragments and feelings and things that mattered. She has memories of people who have been dead for centuries. She has memories of places that no longer exist in anything like their original form. She has memories of versions of the world, the pre-Mushroom War world, the immediate post-war wasteland, the slow emergence of ooh that exists nowhere else except in her mind. She is, in a very real sense, a living archive. The Adventure Time wiki notes this explicitly. Her backstory serves as a bridge between the show's whimsical present and its mysterious past. Through her, we learn about the Great Mushroom War and the early days of ooh and the origins of characters like the Ice King. She is the only witness to most of what the show's world has passed through. Every other character lives in the present and the recent past. Marceline lives in all of it simultaneously. What does that do to a person? What does it do to carry that much history? One possibility is that it becomes oppressive. That the weight of accumulated memory is simply too heavy to carry without consequence. That having lived through enough tragedy, enough loss, enough cycles of hope and disappointment, something in the person buckles under the pressure. This seems to be what the Vampire King's philosophy suggests will happen. He has arrived at a kind of emptiness that might have begun as the rational response to too much accumulated weight. If everything hurts eventually, and if you cannot stop existing long enough for the hurting to stop, then the only option is to stop being the kind of entity that can be hurt. He has solved the weight of memory by ceasing to assign meaning to what he remembers. But Marceline takes a different path, and the difference is subtle and worth examining. What Marceline seems to have done with her 1,000 years of memory is not filed it away and not abandoned it, but layered it, let it be multiple things at once, let the past and the present coexist within her, rather than demanding that she choose between them. The episode Catch-Up, which takes place after the events of Golb's attack at the series finale, when much of ooh is still recovering, shows Marceline and BMO spending time together, and Marceline looking at old photographs of herself as a child with her mother. She is emotional at seeing them. After 1,000 years, she is emotional at seeing her child self with Elise on a beach, some day before the world ended, some ordinary day that became meaningful only in retrospect. That emotional response, still available after 1,000 years, is significant. She has not become numb to her past. The grief and the tenderness are still accessible, still capable of being activated by the right stimulus. She carries her history not as a sealed archive, but as something porous, something she is still in relationship with. This is philosophically interesting because it suggests a different model of what long survival looks like. The Vampire King's model is detachment. You survive long enough by caring less and less until caring has effectively ceased. Marceline's model is something more like integration. You carry the past as something alive within you, rather than as dead weight, and you let it continue to inform you, rather than letting it calcify into numbness. The price of that integration is that the grief is always accessible. You cannot carry the love without carrying the loss. If you allow yourself to still be moved by a photograph of your mother on a beach before the world ended, you are allowing yourself to still be hurt by the absence of your mother after the world ended. The doors that keep the tenderness accessible also keep the grief accessible. You cannot selectively open one without opening the other. Marceline has chosen to keep those doors open. In choosing to still feel, in choosing to remain the kind of being who can be moved by small photographs and old lullabies, and the face of someone who used to know her, she is choosing to keep paying the price of presence. Every time she lets something matter, she is accepting that losing it will cost her something, and she keeps doing it. Every time. This is not stupidity. It is not naivety about the cost. She knows the cost. She has been paying it for 1,000 years. She keeps choosing it anyway because the alternative, the Vampire King's detachment, the emptiness that comes from evacuating meaning, is its own kind of death. And Marceline is not ready to die, even in that more subtle way. She keeps the photographs. She keeps the music. She keeps the people, or the memory of the people, or the faith with the people even after they are gone. That is what 1,000 years of choosing presence looks like from the inside. Not serenity, not the achieved peace of someone who has processed everything and arrived at acceptance, something messier and more honest. The ongoing practice of keeping the doors open when everything in you has learned that open doors are dangerous. The repeated decision to remain someone to whom things can happen. Part 12. The post-apocalyptic as teacher. Something that is easy to overlook in Marceline's story is how much the specific circumstances of her formation, not just the loss but the physical, practical reality of surviving in a post-apocalyptic world, shaped who she became. After the Mushroom War, the world was not simply devastated. It was also emptied of the structures that ordinarily tell people what they are and what they are supposed to do. The institutions and the customs and the inherited meanings that give life its shape, all of that was gone. What remained was the bare fact of survival, and the question of what you did with the fact of your survival once you were managing it. This is, philosophically, a version of one of the oldest questions. What gives life meaning when the structures that used to provide meaning have been destroyed? What do you do when you can no longer defer to tradition, or community, or the accumulated wisdom of a functioning civilization, when all of that has been obliterated and you are standing in the ruins trying to figure out how to go on? There are different ways to answer that question. Some people, some beings, respond to the collapse of external structures by building new ones as quickly as possible. Princess Bubblegum is the most extreme example of this in Adventure Time. She emerges from the primordial gum and immediately begins creating a kingdom, constructing a political order, developing a scientific methodology, building systems and hierarchies and rules that give the new world a shape. Her response to the void is to fill it with structure. Marceline's response is different. She doesn't build kingdoms. She roams, she settles in places temporarily and then moves on. She has a cave she returns to, eventually, but she is not invested in creating a formal structure around her survival. She lives close to the bare fact of existence, without the insulation of institution. This is not simple nomadic wandering. It is, in some ways, a very conscious relationship with the rawness of life. The post-apocalyptic world strips away the middle layers, the conventions, and the comfortable distances, and forces you into direct contact with the most basic questions. What matters? What doesn't? What is worth doing with the time you have? Marceline has been living with those questions for a very long time. She has had to develop her own answers rather than inheriting them from a functioning cultural context. This is partly why her music is so important. In the absence of external structures that would tell her what to value and how to express it, she builds her own internal structure from the materials available to her. The axe bass, the songs, the specific emotional vocabulary of her own experience worked into melody and lyric. This is not just artistic expression in the decorative sense. This is Marceline constructing meaning from scratch, without the scaffolding of an existing tradition to lean on. The humans she protects in the post-war years, the tribe glimpsed in the Stakes flashbacks, wearing their animal hide hats, trying to preserve human music, are doing something very similar. They have decided that music is worth preserving, that the maintenance of cultural forms in the ruins is itself a meaningful act, that being human includes the preservation and transmission of the things that humans have made. They are doing it quietly and desperately, in conditions that would seem to leave no room for culture. And Marceline watches them from a distance, protecting them without letting them know she is doing it. She recognizes something in them, the impulse to make things, to keep things, to insist on the meaningfulness of cultural forms. Even when the larger context that used to support that meaningfulness is gone, she recognizes this impulse because it is also hers. She is the last vampire partly because she kept surviving when the others were killed or destroyed. She is also the keeper of a particular kind of memory, the memory of what the world was like, the songs that came from before, the inherited axe that she turned into an instrument rather than a weapon, and the keeping of that memory is its own form of resistance to the nothingness that the apocalypse tried to install. Hambo, the teddy bear Simon gave her, is part of this. It is an object from before, a small, ordinary object, the kind that the pre-war world produced in enormous quantities and that the post-war world mostly destroyed. And Marceline held onto it for centuries. She held onto this small, soft thing through all the centuries of her vampire existence, kept it with her through cave after cave and era after era. Not because it was useful, because it was Simon's gift, and because it was the last physical object that connected her to him when he was still himself. In the episode Sky Witch, Marceline trades Hambo to get a shirt that Bubblegum had once given her, the shirt being a different kind of memory object. connected to a different relationship, carrying different meaning. The trade is painful. She is giving up the most precious thing she has for something that is precious to her in a different way, because both of them matter, and having to choose between them is the kind of loss that doesn't resolve cleanly. But the fact that she has held on to these objects Hambo for centuries, the shirt for years, tells you something about how Marceline survives the long game of immortality. She anchors herself. She finds objects and relationships and practices that connect her to specific moments and specific people, and she holds them. She does not let the centuries wash everything away into abstraction. She keeps the concrete things, the small specific things, the things that smell like a person or feel like a moment or carry the shape of a particular kind of love. That is a wisdom that is available to mortal people too, and the show is partly offering it as such. In a world that moves fast, that discards things quickly, that prizes novelty over continuity, there is something worth considering in Marceline's insistence on holding on to the things that matter. The photograph of a beach, decades old. The lullaby from a mother who is gone. The axe restrung into a guitar. These are not fetishes or unhealthy fixations. They are anchors. They are the physical forms of the relationships and loves and losses that make a life into something with meaning rather than just duration. Part 13. On being seen. One of the things Adventure Time is doing with Marceline's character across its full run is exploring what it means to be genuinely seen, not observed, not categorized, not assessed for usefulness or threat level, but actually seen, recognized as a specific person with a specific history and specific needs and specific ways of being in the world that are her own. Most of the beings who encounter Marceline in the early seasons of the show see one or more of her categories. They see vampire. They see half-demon. They see thousand-year-old being who floats and has fangs. They see vampire queen, a title that comes with a specific set of associations that shapes how she is perceived before she has done anything in particular. She is, in the eyes of most, a type before she is a person. This is something many people recognize from their own experience, in less supernatural terms. We are categorized by other people before we have had the chance to demonstrate who we actually are. Categorized by how we look, where we come from, what we do, what groups we belong to or are assumed to belong to. The category arrives before the person, and then the person spends time and energy either living up to it, living it down, or trying to make themselves visible past it. Marceline spends considerable portions of her life managing this. The vampire persona, the performed menace, the leather jacket and the floating and the casual references to things that happened centuries ago is partly a deliberate embrace of the category. If they are going to see a vampire, she will give them a vampire. She can perform the type more completely than they can imagine it, and in doing so, she retains a kind of control over the encounter. She is the one deciding what they see, rather than being passively defined by their assumptions. But this has a cost. Performing the category comprehensively is still performing rather than being, and the exhaustion of performance of always being the type rather than the person is one of the more quietly rendered aspects of Marceline's loneliness. She wants to not have to perform. She wants to be in a context where the performance is unnecessary, where she can just be present and have that be enough. The small circle of people who genuinely see her across the show's run is telling. Finn, who refuses to be scared and keeps showing up. Bubblegum, who knows her history and has seen her at her most defensive and at her most vulnerable. Jake, who accepts her for no particular reason other than that she is Finn's friend and that is enough for him. BMO, who sees her grief after the series finale with simple and genuine warmth. These people, this small and specific group, are the ones in whose presence Marceline does not have to be a type. And what she does when she is not being a type is revealing. She is silly. She is warm. She makes terrible jokes that are somehow very funny. She plays music for small animals or for no one in particular. She holds on to stuffed bears and old shirts and photographs of beach days before the world ended. She is, at her most undefended, recognizably and endearingly ordinary. A person who likes to be comfortable and to laugh and to feel that she matters to someone for reasons that have nothing to do with what she can do and everything to do with who she is. Being seen, in Adventure Time's accounting, is not a passive experience. It is not something that simply happens to you when the right person comes along. It is something that requires you to be available to be seen, to lower the performance, to let the defended surface become permeable, to risk that what is underneath will be accepted rather than rejected, And that risk is real. It has consequences. It can result in the kind of hurt that Marceline has experienced when she let people in and they left or changed or were taken. But it also results in the kind of connection that makes the rest of it bearable. The moments of genuine recognition, Finn treating her like a person, Bubblegum knowing her history and staying anyway, Simon writing letters across his own disappearance, these are the moments that the show returns to when it wants to anchor Marceline's arc in something that justifies the cost of her openness. The cost is real, but so is what you get for paying it. Part 14. The Legacy She Carries. There is a moment in the final episodes of the main Adventure Time series when everything has gone catastrophically wrong in the way that Adventure Time finales go. The world-eating entity GOLB is destroying everything. The Candy Kingdom is under siege. The relationships and friendships that the show has spent years building are being tested by the most extreme possible circumstances. And in the middle of all of this, Marceline and Princess Bubblegum finally, openly, acknowledge what they are to each other. They kiss. For the first time, without ambiguity, in front of the audience and in front of the other characters. The timing is meaningful. Not because it happens in a moment of peace, it doesn't, but because it happens in a moment of chaos, in a moment when the world is falling apart and there is no particular guarantee that either of them is going to survive the next 5 minutes. And yet they find each other and they acknowledge what is real between them. This is the show's argument, made through action rather than dialogue. Love is not something you wait to express until conditions are favorable. Conditions are never going to be entirely favorable. The world is always going to have something catastrophic happening in it, or about to happen in it, or recovering from having happened in it. If you wait for the chaos to stop before you acknowledge what matters to you, you will wait forever. Marceline has been waiting in various ways for a long time. She has been waiting for things to be safe enough, certain enough, stable enough to fully commit to the people she loves. She has been waiting, unconsciously, for the guarantee that the person she lets in won't leave or change or be taken. And of course, that guarantee is never coming. It was never coming. There is no version of love that comes with a warranty against loss. The kiss in the finale is Marceline stopping waiting. It is, in that sense, the culmination of her whole arc, the final version of the choice she has been making incrementally throughout the series, to stay rather than withdraw, to risk rather than protect, to say yes to the specific person rather than the abstract safety of not saying. What she leaves behind as a legacy, in the context of the show, is not conquest or kingdom building or the accumulation of power. What she leaves behind is more modest and more durable. She is the person who remembered Simon when everyone else had forgotten who he used to be. She is the person who protected human communities in the post-war years from a distance, anonymously, without requiring recognition. She is the person who turned a weapon into a song. She is the person who kept showing up for the ghost of the person she loved for centuries without giving up. She is the person who finally, after everything, let herself be loved back. That is a legacy made of relationship rather than achievement. Made of faithfulness rather than triumph. Made of the small, persistent, repeated acts of staying that are harder than they look and less visible than they should be. The academic paper on stakes that was published in Research Literature argues that Marceline's arc ultimately represents a form of amor fati, the affirmation of one's own existence as it is, not as it could be or should be or might be in some other timeline. As it is, specifically, with all its specific weight. She is a half-demon vampire who cannot walk in full sunlight, who carries 1,000 years of loss, who was formed in apocalypse, and who has repeatedly tried and failed to escape the nature she was given. And she ends up, in the conclusion of her arc, affirming that nature, choosing it, making something with it rather than continuing to fight against it. The amor fati is not performed happiness. It is not the pretense that everything is fine. It is the genuine affirmation of the specific existence she has, because it is hers, because it contains the people she loves, because it has made her who she is, and who she is, in the end, is someone worth being. Part 15. What she means to us. Adventure Time ran from 2010 to 2018, and then continued in the Distant Lands specials through 2021. Across that time, Marceline became one of the most beloved characters in the show and one of the most discussed characters in animated television history. There are academic papers about her. There are fan communities that have sustained themselves for years, analyzing her arc and discussing what she means. There is the Obsidian special, which was nominated for a GLAAD Media Award for Outstanding Kids and Family Programming, an acknowledgement that the relationship between Marceline and Bubblegum represented something meaningful for LGBTQ audiences and for representation in animation more broadly. Why does she resonate so deeply? Part of it is the specific emotional content of her story. Loss, abandonment, the difficulty of maintaining connection when connection has always been dangerous, the slow and imperfect work of healing. These are not exotic experiences. They are the common experiences of a great many people, dressed in unusual clothes. People who have had absent or disappointing parents recognize something in her relationship with Hudson. People who have watched someone they love change into someone they no longer recognize see something in her relationship with Simon. People who have been hurt in relationships that were real and complicated and not simply resolvable into good person, bad person, see something in her relationship with Bubblegum. People who have felt like they don't fit into available categories, like they are too much of too many different things to be contained by any single label, feel seen by a character who is half demon, half human, turned vampire, who plays punk rock on a battle axe and floats through the world, not quite fitting in but refusing to be smaller than she is. The vampire identity is a long-running metaphor in fiction for the outsider, for the person who exists at the margins of normative society, who has powers and needs that the mainstream cannot accommodate, who is both feared and desired. Marceline uses this metaphor in ways that are honest about both the power and the cost of being an outsider. She is genuinely powerful. She is also genuinely lonely. Both of those things are true, and the show never resolves them into each other. The power doesn't eliminate the loneliness. The loneliness doesn't negate the power. She contains both, and the containing of both is part of what makes her interesting and part of what makes her recognizable. There is also something important in the fact that she is not fixed. She is not the same in the final episodes of the show as she was in the first season, and she is not the same in Obsidian as she was at the series finale. She grows, visibly, imperfectly, non-linearly, with setbacks and relapses and moments where the old patterns resurface despite the work she has done, but genuinely. She changes over the course of the show in ways that feel earned, that are rooted in the specific experiences she has had rather than imposed by narrative necessity. And that kind of non-linear, imperfect, genuine growth is rare in any form of storytelling, animated or otherwise. She also has fun. This is worth remembering, in a discussion that has been heavily weighted toward the serious parts of her arc. Marceline is funny. She is playful. She pulls pranks on Finn and Jake for entertainment. She raises the undead as a party trick. She floats through the world with a certain casual delight in her own capabilities and her own strangeness. The grief and the difficulty are real and they matter, but they are not the whole of her. She can hold the whole of her simultaneously, the 1,000 years and the silly jokes, the cosmic weight and the levity, and that capacity is itself part of what makes her worth spending time with. The show understands this. It never lets Marceline become simply a tragic figure, because tragic figures are ultimately about their tragedy rather than about themselves. Adventure Time is insistent that Marceline is about herself, about all of herself, the parts that are painful and the parts that are joyful and the parts that are ridiculous and the parts that are profound. The whole person, in the whole of her contradictions. And that, in the end, is the philosophy of Marceline in its most compressed form. She is a contradiction that refuses to be resolved. She is 1,000 years of loss that refuses to become numbness. She is a monster that refuses to be only a monster. She is someone who has every reason to close and who keeps finding ways to stay open. She is, in the most important sense, alive. Stubbornly, persistently, against all reasonable odds, alive and choosing to stay that way, choosing what that word means, making it mean something more than just biological continuity. 1,000 years, a candy bar in the rubble, a lullaby from a mother who sang in the ruins, an axe restrung into a song, and still, the bass playing in the dark. Part 16. The recurring theme of departure. If you trace a single thread through Marceline's entire story across all the seasons, all the episodes, the miniseries, the specials, the thread you find most consistently running through everything is departure, people leaving. The people she needs most, going. Her mother left. In the kindest possible way, with love animating the decision, but she left. She sent Marceline forward and stayed behind. And the child Marceline walked ahead into a world without her mother in it, carrying a map she was supposed to draw to a place her mother was never going to reach. The image of Elise standing at a distance, watching Marceline walk away, smiling so her daughter would not worry, this is the founding image of Marceline's emotional life. A love that expressed itself by going. A mother who chose her daughter's forward momentum over her own final goodbye. Simon left. Not all at once and not by choice, but gradually, imperceptibly at first and then with increasing speed, the Simon she knew departed from the body that kept his name. He became the Ice King while still being alive, went somewhere she could not follow, to a version of himself that did not know her. The body remained, the person inside it was gone, and Marceline was left in relationship with an absence wearing a face she recognized. Hunson Abadir was never fully present to begin with. His departures were the departures of someone who was intermittently, partially, there's someone who showed up in dramatic and destructive ways, and then was gone again, leaving wreckage behind. His presence was itself a form of absence, because his attention rarely landed on her in any sustained way. He was the departure that never properly arrived. And bubblegum for a significant period was a departure Marceline initiated herself. She was the one who left not in the physical sense of going somewhere, but in the relationship sense of withdrawing, of choosing to let the distance grow rather than bridging it when bridging was possible. This is the version of departure that is perhaps hardest to examine, because it requires acknowledging that Marceline has been, at times, her own instrument of loss. She pushed away someone she loved because the fear of being left was greater in those moments than the love she felt. The pattern of departure shapes everything about how she moves through the world. It shapes the wall she builds, the way she talks about herself, the music she makes, the relationships she approaches with such preemptive, careful distance. When your formative experiences have been shaped by the people who matter, leaving for whatever reasons, however justified, you develop a set of expectations about how relationships end. You learn, without anyone teaching you explicitly, that the ending is coming. The only question is when and how, and you adapt your behavior to that expectation. The adaptation looks like not needing. If you don't need anyone, you cannot be hurt by their leaving. The adaptation looks like leaving first. If you create the departure rather than waiting for it, you are at least in control of the timing. The adaptation looks like the performance of not caring. If nothing matters to you, nothing can be taken from you. These are survival strategies. They developed in response to real patterns, in real experience. They are not irrationalities or character flaws. They are the reasonable responses of a child who paid attention to what happened to her and drew the available conclusions. The problem is that they do not stop being active when the original circumstances that generated them are no longer operative. 1,000 years later, Marceline is still running departure management software that was written when she was 6 years old. It still activates in the same situations. It still tells her to leave before she can be left, to not need before the need can be disappointed. Part of Marceline's arc, the arc that runs beneath all the specific plot lines and relationship dynamics, is the slow, incremental, painstaking process of updating that software, of learning, experience by experience, that the people in her current life are not necessarily going to repeat the pattern. That departure is not the only possible outcome of closeness. That sometimes people stay, Finn stays, Jake stays, Bubblegum stays, across the enormous difficulty of their relationship history, stays through the breakup and the years of distance, and comes back and stays again. BMO stays with her in the aftermath of the finale, in Ketchup, sitting with her in her grief without demanding anything, just being present in the way that a very good friend knows how to be. And something slowly shifts. Not completely, not irrevocably. The old software always has the capacity to reactivate when circumstances feel similar enough to the original conditions. But the evidence accumulates. People stay. People come back. People choose her repeatedly and deliberately rather than abandoning her in the ways she was trained to expect. The lesson takes a long time to absorb. 1,000 years might not be enough time to absorb it fully. But she is moving in the direction of it, and the direction matters, even when the destination is still far off. There is something deeply hopeful in that. Not the triumphant hope of a story that has been resolved, but the quieter, harder hope of a story that is still ongoing. The hope of a person who is still learning, still updating, still capable of being surprised by the evidence that connection is possible and that it lasts, still capable of being moved by people choosing to stay. Part 17. Adventure Time's Honest World. It is worth saying something about what kind of show Adventure Time is. Because Marceline's philosophical depth does not exist in isolation, it exists as part of a wider project that the show was engaged in. Across its full run, that was unusual for a children's animated television series, and remains unusual in retrospect. Adventure Time was created by Pendleton Ward and premiered on Cartoon Network in April 2010. The premise is simple enough. Finn, a young human boy, and Jake, his magical dog, are best friends who go on adventures in the land of Ooo, a post-apocalyptic world populated by candy kingdoms and ice wizards and mathematical princesses and everything in between. On the surface, it reads as zany, colorful children's entertainment. But Ward and the team of writers and storyboard artists he assembled around the show were doing something much more ambitious. They were building, across many seasons, a world with real emotional and philosophical complexity, a world that took seriously the questions it raised about death and loss and identity and love and what it means to grow up, even in a setting that included lumpy space princess and a penguin army and a sentient lich who wanted to end all life. The show earned, over its run, a reputation for being unexpectedly capable of emotional devastation. Not in a manipulative way, not the cheap manipulation of killing likable characters for shock value or engineering tearjerker moments without sufficient narrative preparation, but in the earned way, the way where something that has been carefully built over a long time finally arrives at its weight, and the weight is real because the construction was real. Marceline is the most sustained example of this. Her depth was built incrementally, across years, in small moments and large ones, in episodes dedicated to her backstory, and in episodes where she appeared briefly and said or did something that added a new facet to the already complex picture of who she was. Ward himself said, early in the show's history, that Marceline was his favorite character because he did not know everything about her history and backstory, and he felt that the mystery added something, that not having all the answers made her more interesting than characters whose parameters were fully defined. That willingness to let Marceline be not fully known, to be a character with gaps and silences, and unexplained histories and relationships that the audience had to piece together from fragments, is part of what gives her the texture of a real person rather than a fictional construct. Real people are not fully legible to the people around them. Real people have histories that are only partially visible, wounds that only partially explain their behavior, loves that are only partially expressed. Marceline feels like a real person, partly because the show was disciplined about not over-explaining her. The show was also making a serious philosophical argument with her. An argument that goes something like this. Immortality, if it were real, would not be glamorous. It would not be the wish-fulfillment fantasy of eternal youth and unlimited time. It would be an enormous and difficult burden, full of losses that ordinary human life is spared the accumulation of. The being who lives forever is not the being who escapes the human condition. They are the being who experiences the human condition more intensively, more repeatedly, in longer and longer accumulation, without the mercy of the death that eventually brings mortal lives to their conclusion. But, and this is the crucial second part of the argument, that being can still choose what to do with the immortality, what to make of the accumulation, whether to let it hollow them out or whether to keep insisting on presence and connection and the music made in the dark. The choice is never final. It must be made again and again, but it is always available. And Adventure Time proposes, through Marceline's story, that the choosing is the thing. The repeated, imperfect, costly, necessary choosing to stay. This is an argument about mortal life too, about all of us who are not immortal half-demon vampires but who face, in our own much shorter lifetimes, the accumulation of loss and the pressure that accumulation puts on the will to remain open. Every person who has lost someone knows something of what Marceline knows. Every person who has had to decide whether to let the loss close them down or whether to stay available to what comes next knows something of the choice she makes, over and over. She makes it visible by making it slow and enormous 1,000 years instead of a human lifetime, a world-ending war instead of an ordinary bereavement. But the choice itself is ordinary. It is the choice that all of us face, in our own smaller ways, in our own shorter time frames, and that is why she resonates. Not because her life is like our lives, because the thing at the center of her life, the question of how to stay present in a world that keeps taking things from you, is the same question at the center of ours. She is recognizable not because of what she is, but because of what she is doing with what she is. She is doing what all of us are trying to do, at whatever scale our own lives present the question. She is choosing, again and again, to stay. A final note before you sleep. There is one last thing worth sitting with, before this ends and the quiet takes over completely. Marceline does not reach a destination. After everything, after the Mushroom War and Simon and the Vampire Queen years and the centuries of traveling alone and the fights with bubblegum and the slow, difficult work of letting people back in, she does not arrive somewhere that looks like resolution. She does not stand at the end of her story with all the loose ends gathered and tied. The losses she has carried do not become smaller. Simon does not fully return. Her mother does not come back. The 1,000 years do not become any lighter once the finale is over. What changes is not the weight. What changes is her relationship to the weight. That is all healing ever actually is, not the removal of the thing that hurt you, but a slow renegotiation of how much of your present it is allowed to occupy. She is still the girl who sat in the rubble eating a sandwich. She will always be that girl. The question was never whether she could stop being that girl. The question was whether she could be that girl and also be someone who lets people sit beside her in the ruins. Someone who plays music that tells the truth. Someone who, when the person she loves reaches for her hand in the middle of the end of the world, reaches back. She reaches back. After everything, she reaches back. And if there is a philosophy in that gesture, and there absolutely is, it is the oldest and most difficult one of all. That love is not a feeling that arrives and stays on its own. It is a practice. A daily choosing. A willingness to reach toward the thing you are afraid of losing before you lose it, rather than waiting until it is already gone to understand what it was worth. Marceline figured that out across 1,000 years. You have whatever time you have. Spend some of it reaching back. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for giving this the time and the quiet it was asking for. If this reached you wherever you are, whatever time it is there, please leave a like, subscribe if you want to keep coming back to this kind of thing, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I genuinely love those moments of connection, the ones that remind me this video is reaching into someone's quiet somewhere in the world. Sleep well, take care of yourself, and like Marceline figured out, in her own long and impossibly complicated way, the people around you are worth more than the cost of staying close to them. Good night.